everyone. Welcome to the career webcast for interviewing. I'm really excited to have all of you here with us today and excited to have two alumni recruiting professionals, Marcia Torres and Tyler Monsey, here with us to share about the STAR method, which is looking at how to interview using situation, task, action, and result as the format. Today we're going to learn about the STAR interview approach, how to successfully plan for an interview, get day of interview tips, and also receive advice for how to have a great experience while you interview. I'll turn it over to our first presenter to introduce herself.
Thanks, Julia. You'd think by now I would have picked up on the fact that I was muted for a moment, but I am back. It's Marcia Torres, and I am with a graduate of Oregon State from 2001 food science program. And I've been working in the HR field for the last 14, 15 years. And I've had experience through a couple different organizations, both large and small. But I'm currently with Partner Hero, which is an outsourcing company here that is a global outsourcing company. And I am their Global Director of Talent Acquisition.
Hello, I'm Tyler Monsey. I graduated from OSU back in 2008. Been in talent acquisition ever since, leaving beautiful Corvallis, as you can see right behind me. Currently, I'm a talent acquisition and recruiting consultant working for Creative Alignments, helping a lot of startup and scale-up companies making a positive impact on the world.
Wonderful. Thank you both so much. We're so grateful for you being here and sharing your advice. Marcia is going to share some tips and advice for us using the STAR method. We're going to learn about that interview approach, about some differences between in-person and virtual interviews, and just understanding how to prep for an interview. Also, she's going to give a few resume tips, and Marcia's been doing this for a very long time, and I'm looking forward to having her share her tips.
Thank you. Yeah, so as Julia mentioned, we're going to talk about the STAR method. And so the STAR method, for those that aren't familiar, is situation, task, action, and result. And I always like to add that there's always a bonus point or a brownie point at the very end of that, and that's what did you learn, right? That's not just the result. So in terms of interviews, a lot of companies right now are doing a lot more behavioral-based structured interviews. And one of the things that we look at from a talent acquisition standpoint is looking at past behaviors being indicators of future performance, which means essentially we're looking for examples that you may have of things that you have done, and not necessarily the theoretical or the what ifs, but the actual work that you've done in each of those situations. So let's start with the S, for example. S is a situation, and what we say there is that you really take that opportunity to set the scene, put the scenario together as to what it is that you're going to be talking about. And I'll give you a couple of examples of what this might look like throughout after I kind of go through the whole acronym piece. There's a task. The task is really describing the specific challenges or the tasks that you had associated that's related to the question that's being asked. There's the action, which is the what did you do, right? So talking about how did you handle the situation? How did you handle what was your approach? What was your thinking in terms of how to get the task accomplished? And then at the end is the result, the R. And that's the ability for you to showcase and share what the results are that you were able to achieve based on the actions that you selected. And when I say the bonus point is what did you learn, is sometimes we're also looking at how did you put everything together and then decide, you know what, I don't want this situation to happen again, so this is what I learned for the future, or this is how I've also applied this thinking in this situation as well. And that gives an opportunity for the interviewers to see what additional knowledge and information were you able to apply to other scenarios, and be able to showcase your abilities and your behaviors in that way. So I wanted to take a quick question in terms of One that's always, I've had asked on multiple interviews myself. I know I asked some of the candidates as well. And one that I wanted to relate to not just those that have experience out in the field, but also those that are current grads that maybe don't have a lot of work experience. And how do you answer this question? So the question here is, tell me about a time when you had to provide difficult feedback to a team member. So that would be the question that we asked, right? And again, the tell me about a time is very specific. We're asking for a specific situation. And then you're going to go through and think about that and put together what your situation, the task, the action, and the result. Now, if you have some work experience and you've been able to either manage somebody or you worked on a team with somebody and you had to provide feedback to them, you might be able to provide a response to this question using that. However, for our current grads or new grads that maybe don't have as much extensive work experience, you're also able to pull from some of the work that you did as a student. And so, it could be that you took a course in the last semester and it required a group project, and that would be the situation. And that you had 4 people in that project and in that group. And then what was the situation in terms of what was the project about? So you're able to tie those things together. The task is, what did you do as a group to develop your plan? And one that, how did you accomplish that plan, right? What were the actions that you took to accomplish that plan? And as you're going through that, you can talk about, the feedback that you then had to provide to a team member on that group. So it's not a work example, it's still a school example, and you're still able to connect everything together. At the end of it is the result of how did you as a team be able to provide success story from that project, as well as provide that feedback. And, it could be that at the end of the project work, you and that individual ended up working together on another project and were successful in accomplishing that task or that project with another team or whatever it could have been, right? So there's a bunch of different ways that you can go ahead and explain this situation, even if you don't have a lot of work experience. And that's the key thing for a lot of our current grads that are coming out right now is, pull from some of the experiences that you have within your university career and be able to share and showcase that as well. It could be student organizations, it could be leadership roles that you've had within student groups, a variety of different options there. So that's situation, task, action, and result. One thing is you want to do before you go to an interview is always try to practice ahead of time. And you don't want your responses to sound so structured. So you want to make sure that there's a flow to them as well, and that you're able to pull all the pieces and the information together, and always have a couple of different examples ready to go in case you have very similar questions being asked. You want to be brief in your setup. You want to give just enough background information that people on the interview panel have a sense to what the story or the image that you're trying to put together is for them. But the result is really what we're looking for, right? It's understanding, how did you get that task accomplished? Were you successful? Were you able to learn something from that? Were you able to, how did you troubleshoot? How did you problem solve? Did you have a creative approach to the situation? And using this structure is a great tool for the STAR method, is to kind of build all those responses and ideas ahead of time. If you haven't interviewed in the past, it's a good idea to take a couple of examples and write down what those would be, and pull a couple of good interview questions that you can find online. And again, I highly recommend looking at the structured interview questions and the behavioral based interview questions, because those will help pull those STAR portions together for you pretty quickly. In terms of some tips around virtual interviews versus in-person interviews, the nice thing with virtual interviews is that you have the ability to have some additional notes that you can refer to as you're interviewing, which may or may not be the case when you're doing in-person interviews. The virtual side of things is you have to remember that you still have to interact with your interview panel, even if you are completing the interview virtually. And I always kind of go back to, if it's a phone interview, think about radio DJs. Radio DJs I've heard they use a trick of where they smile while they're speaking, because it changes the form in which they're speaking and the tone that they use. And even if they're having a tough day, they can still come across with a different vibe in their spoken language. It brings across a different perception of the conversation you're trying to have during the radio session. It's very similar to an interview, right? If you are over the phone, make sure you're smiling. If you're virtually doing it as well, you want to, smile, make sure that you are in a comfortable setting, making sure that you have limited distractions that are out there, turning off your email, putting your phone away. It's always recommended to make sure you test your system ahead of time to make sure everything is working and that the speakers are working and everything else. And, a lot of the interview panels, especially over the last year, have become a lot more flexible with dogs barking in the background, because sometimes that is the case, right? That is some of the challenges, or sometimes there are some technical difficulties, but you really do want to try to check out all of those things before you start your interview. All right, Yulia, I think that's most of the topics I had for today. Anything that you want me to include that I missed?
Great. That was a really good description of the STAR method. And we got a bunch of questions through the online registration form, and thank you for everyone who registered and submitted those. We also have a couple in the Q&A currently. One for you, Marcia, is what do you do when the interviewer is trying to push you to apply for a position you're not interested in and not the position you are interviewing for? And I've heard that from alumni before. What do you recommend to people in that case?
That's a great question. Sometimes as interviewers, we see potential in you that maybe you may not see. And so kind of go in there with an open mind. They might see a better fit for the role than what you've initially applied for. If you are truly committed to a particular role, it's okay to ask, what is it that maybe you're missing, that maybe they're trying to encourage you to go in a different direction, or if there is a reason why you're being asked to be considered for another role instead of the one you originally applied for. Sometimes it's just a matter of, making sure you have the right person for that role, the right person in that right seat. And there's a lot of things going on in the background. There's a lot of pieces that are moving and that you may not necessarily be aware of. And it's okay to ask those questions. Just make sure you're doing it in a mindful and respectful way, and that you're doing it from a place of curiosity and wanting feedback versus a place of a negativity and desire to not be interested in a potential role. I always say, never say no to something unless there's something that you really, really don't want to do. You might be surprised you'll find something different and something exciting behind that door that you hadn't even considered.
That's really great advice. And actually, that reminds me of my first job after grad school. And I ended up getting a job that I didn't apply for, and I liked it. Another question for Marcia is, I'll be interviewing for a position within my firm. And so I know the folks interviewing me. Should I try to keep at it at a more formal level, the way I would if I didn't know them, or should I capitalize on that personal connection? And this one's for Marcia again.
Sure. So that's always a fun one as well. If you have situations on where you have maybe you've been asked a question that the situation is related to somebody in that room, I would tend to try to stay away from that. I would try to find situations in where those people maybe in the room aren't necessarily a part of your example, as it could be uncomfortable depending on the direction of how that response goes, especially if it's one that's providing difficult feedback and that person is there in that interview panel. Maybe not the best example you want to use. I do feel like it really depends on your organization's culture in terms of the formality of things. I do tend to suggest that you follow the interview as if this is the first time you've interviewed with them, except for you have the additional benefit of knowing what goes on a little bit behind the scenes and on the day-to-day basis. So you have that added benefit to incorporate some of those company core values, some of the missions, some of the strategy, some of the conversations in terms of financials that maybe somebody from the external side of things may not have the exact knowledge on that, and can't necessarily pull that into their examples. But number one is, again, just be careful on the examples that you're using, and that you're not necessarily using ones that we're going to include that interview panel that's there in front of you.
That's really excellent advice. Thank you, Marcia. One last set of questions for you before we move on to Tyler. The question, Marcia, is it's two scenarios that were given in the registration, and I'd love for you to talk about both. And I'm suspecting that the advice might be similar. Any tips for stay-at-home parents who took a 19-year break from work to raise children? And another one, any suggestions for older job applicants who are competing with the younger applicants in a new career?
I love that question. It's so interesting. So right now, if you look in the UK, there's a lot of work going on in terms of getting folks who have taken a break in their careers and having them come back. There's a lot of actually even companies now that are looking at sort of bringing back candidates and considering candidates who have had a break in their careers for different circumstances in life, right? And you're starting to see this huge trend of that kind of swinging over to looking for those that may have those breaks. And it's okay. I think it's all about how you put together your resume, how you present your application and everything that you have coming forward. And then from the standpoint of the interview side of things is, you know, what have you done during that time, right? And there's a lot of great things that you can do as a stay-at-home parent, or, you know, I've had some friends reach out, you know, I've been a homeschool teacher. I'm like, well, that's great experience, right? You're managing everything. You're doing curriculum development, you're doing scheduling and rostering, right? You're looking at the financial and the budget side of things, your time management side. So there's all sorts of challenges that can be pulled in from different examples. And I would say, don't be afraid to use those examples in your interview responses. And, you know, I would ask that, you know, if you have the opportunity to give somebody that is in that situation a chance, I would ask that you give them that chance as well, right? If you're looking for that opportunity. And if you would want to have that opportunity considered. And I think it's just sort of removing some of that additional bias and concerns on that side of individuals who have taken a break, or older generation that is looking to come back into the workforce. People are starting to work a little longer these days than they have in the past. So it's definitely something that that is totally normal and it should be accepted.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that. And then we are turning over to Tyler for his advice and tips.
Yeah, let me circle back real quick to those last two questions, because I think there's some really functional ways to help combat that. And I think it's it's kind of a blessing and a curse with the modern age of technology, right? I think there's a big concern for folks who've stepped away for a while, and potentially folks from older generations not having the technical aptitude or the technology base to compete with, say, you know, younger generations or recent college grads. However, we live in an area, you know, where our internet access provides us to all the education and updates we need. So I always recommend to people looking to jump back into the workforce, or potentially are seeing some ageism concerns within their, you know, career searches, to really dive in and take some self-development on. It's never too late to learn. So look at the jobs you're interested in. What key technologies are, you know, vital for those roles? What type of free YouTube tutorials or free online trainings can you take? And I think a really big key in the modern age is adding as much technology skill set that you have into your resume. So it shows that not only do you have those skills, but you're able to adapt to technologies and take on new software and other platforms that are being requested. And I think that's a good way to show that, you know, just because you might not fit their ideal version of what the job is calling for, you have the skill set and you're continuously learning and developing those skills to be relevant for those career paths. So, you know, that's, I think, one that everybody can do as long as they have a smartphone or a computer at home. You know, free tutorials, free trainings, even if it's low-cost trainings. I know LinkedIn has a very detailed library with all sorts of trainings and capabilities that you can learn and take on, as well as I think it's lynda.com. There's a handful out there. So those are some really kind of easy to take on tasks to develop your skill set and your resume. And when it comes to interviewing in general, I think we've seen it in 2020, especially that, we live in a virtual world. So a little bit of a theme that I was coming across as I was putting together some information for everybody today is, when it comes to interviews, I think a really important key is kind of setting yourself up for success. What can you do proactively and during the interview to be in a place to be successful in that interview? So I think number one, we already touched on a little bit, is, virtual interviewing, right? Video interviewing. I think there are some differing tools that you want to implement when it comes to, is it a video interview or is it an interview on site? So with video interviews, I saw a little bit of issue on my own logging into this today is make sure that you log in early and do a check with your technology, right? You want your speakers, your microphone to be working. You need your camera to be working. You don't want to show up to a video interview and not be able to get on the video. A really important key is having your eye level at the camera. No one wants that, under the chin, up the nostrils view, or the, 10 feet above coming down view. So try to have that eye contact available with having the camera at eye level. Also, I always recommend if you can have like smaller discrete headphones, maybe not the massive podcast headphones. And it's really beneficial because not everybody has a very high dollar laptop that has really clear audio. And what can happen is if multiple people are talking, your microphone can be picking up your speakers, and then you get that really rough feedback happening, and it can derail the interview and kind of take the focus off of your skill set and your qualifications. So if you have a chance to put in headphones, and especially if the systems will, I know Google Meet and Zoom do it, allow you to route the audio through your phone, it's really good for that clear communication on the audio side. And to the point, my dog has ran in and out of my office about 5 times already. Having that better setup for audio will help with potential distractions wherever you're interviewing from. And then, additionally with that, if we're looking at on-site interviews, we're going a little old school here, right? Pre-2020, map out how long it's going to take you to get there, right? Make sure you show up 10 minutes early, walk in 5 minutes early. You always want to, again, think about how you're setting yourself up to be competent and confident for this interview. And running late is never a good start with that. So as someone who has had issues with punctuality in my days, get there 10 minutes early, be ready to walk in 5 minutes early, and you're going to be feeling confident and ready. Additionally, it's a little old school and it's not the most eco-friendly, but I still think it's a good thing to bring a printed copy of your resume for everybody you're interviewing with. They might be running late. They might have had, laptop or printer issue, and maybe they haven't seen your resume before. So it never hurts. Worst case scenario, you can recycle it or use it for future interview. So I think those are really good tips for kind of setting yourself up for success to hit the interview. Then once it comes time to that interview, I think it's really important to have done your research on the front end, right? A very frustrating thing for hiring managers and a really quick way to get ruled out is if they ask you about the company and you really don't know anything. Because again, with everyone having one of these handy 5-minute search, hop online, review the website, there's really not an excuse in this day and time to not have done at least some research and have some understanding of the company. Additionally, I think it's the next step to really make sure you review the role, review that job description, make sure you have a pretty solid understanding of it. And then if you have access to LinkedIn, which I hope everybody does, see if there's other people in the company in that role. How many people are in that role? What do their tenures look like? What do their backgrounds look like? How does that align for you? And then also, look up your interviewers. Who are you interviewing with, right? Try to find a fun fact about them and their LinkedIn profile that you can use to make what I call like a micro connection, right? This is a personal connection with them, showing that you have interest in them as a personal and professional, not just in the fact that you're in the same room or on the same video with them. So I think having those connections and doing that research is really important. Also, check out employee reviews. I mean, the digital age is very beneficial for all of us, right? There's Glassdoor, there's Google reviews, there's LinkedIn reviews. See what people are saying about the company, right? If you get online and they have a 1.5 star rating and most of the reviews are pretty awful, it's not saying it's 100% that way, but that's good information for you to be aware of, going into an interview with a company you might be spending a lot of time at. On the flip side, if they're really positive, that's a chance for you to use that knowledge you've gained in the research process to talk about some of the really positive reviews you've seen and show that additional level of research and insight that you've gained into the company. And then I think really, again, making sure you understand the job description and making sure the location is functional, right? That's something I'm seeing on a daily basis of some of my clients want people fully on site, some are fully remote, and a lot are going to a hybrid model. So knowing what they're looking for, seeing if that's mentioned in the job description or online. And if it's not, be curious about that, because if you're in a situation where you need to be fully remote for a reason and they're looking to have someone primarily on site, that's good to know early in the process to save everybody a little bit of time and make sure you're aligning the right way. And then I think a big key that usually is looked at as a fear and something that's going to hurt someone in an interview, but really is beneficial, and Marcia talked about it a little bit, is being able to be accountable and own some of the areas where you're not as strong at. I don't think I've ever seen a job description for a role that the candidate who ended up taking the position was 100% qualified for. That's pretty unrealistic across the board. So it's okay to have a few places where you're a little light at, but be able to address those and not try to fluff around those. Interview panels really weed that out pretty quickly if you're trying to skirt the issue or, try to spin it and take the emphasis off that you are lacking those capabilities. Address them. Let them know, yes, I am a little short in, X, Y, or Z area, knowing that I'm a little short in the area, Z that is, number 4 on the description. Here's some things I've looked into and some trainings I could do to potentially get caught up or up to speed. So having that almost that kind of star mentality, right, with that of, yes, I'm a little short here, but here's a plan I've already looked into to get caught up to be more qualified for the role. That's going to show accountability, forward thinking, and someone to add some run room to take on things that they're maybe not comfortable with and be able to be successful in accomplishing those. And then I think it's really important to know your situation. What do you need? Where do you need to be, right? I think this ties in a lot with compensation. I know there's been other webinars on compensation, but it doesn't really matter, in my opinion, what that job description says X number is, because if that doesn't work for you and help you have the quality of life and be able to pay bills and everything that everyday life entails, it doesn't really matter then, right? Because if you need a different compensation, it's never going to work. And really holding out that hope that you're going to be able to negotiate a 15 to 40% higher compensation after 4 rounds of interviews, there's a lot of potential for that to blow up. And I've rarely ever seen that work well. So I think it's important to kind of figure out, a 10K, 10% range of where at the low level of that, you're really comfortable, you're happy with that. And then that kind of higher end of the range is like, oh, that's, icing on the cake, right? Fantastic. That'll make it really easy to say yes to that offer. But know if you have some flexibility with that too. And then that also comes into where's the position located. If you're relocating and say going from Portland, Oregon, which isn't the least expensive place to live, but you need to move to San Francisco, you're talking about a 40% higher cost of living there, right? So you need to factor that in and do that math on your end to make sure you know where you need to be. And then also, when is the start date? Can I start? They want someone in 2 weeks. I still got classes for 4 more weeks. That won't work. Is there relocation needed? How soon would they need that? I couldn't get there for a month. They want me in 2 weeks. So know those situations and how they work for you. And being able to be kind of forthright and open about that in the process is really beneficial, and hiring managers appreciate it. Transparency oftentimes will add more flexibility versus hoping and praying and then dropping kind of a bomb on the back end. That's usually where you see that flexibility decrease. And then again, modern world that we're in, are we digital? Are we on site? Where do you need to be? If you have restrictions or, you're a stay-at-home parent or whatever it might be, you can't be on site the full time. So if they need you to be on site 100% of the time, but you need fully remote, again, be transparent about that on the front end, because hoping that you can somehow back end negotiate that at the very end is likely to not work out very well. And that could always translate into another role down the road with the company that can be fully remote in that example. So just being transparent and really knowing where you need to be and what you need from it is really important. And then one of the last ones, because I know this is a lot, is, always come prepared with a couple questions for the interview. You don't have to have super high detail questions, but having curiosity and wanting to know about the company, the role or the team is really important. So look up a couple general questions you can ask to gain a little more insight about the company, the role, the team. And then I always think, again, making these micro connections and showing interest into the people that you're interviewing with, because even in this digital age, we're still people working with people. Find out, what that hiring manager, especially if they're the direct hiring manager, why they love the company, what gets them excited. because you might learn something great from them. They get to talk about something they're really passionate about, and when you can evoke feelings and, of positivity and passion from people, they're going to remember you in a better light as well. But the flip side of that, which is really important for you, is if they seem really unexcited or, disengaged or don't really have anything positive to say, now you know a little bit more about your potential manager. And if they're not really engaged, don't really love their job, are they going to be the ones that are going to give you the mentorship and the development and really be committed to your career path? Or are you going to want to work under them every day? So either way, you can make a really positive impact or gain some very valuable information on your end. So I think those are all some things that could be very beneficial. Again, that prep work, you're interviewing for a job, so treat it like a job, being ready, being prepared when you get there, being focused, accountable and transparent, and then, making those micro personal connections. I think those things will really be beneficial in pretty much any interview setting you're going to find yourself in.
Excellent. Thank you, Tyler. That was great advice. Tyler, there's a couple questions that came through for you in the Q&A, and then there's some through the form as well. The first from the Q&A is, this is tied to that first initial question with the gaps in the resume. How would you format your resume with those large gaps in your work experience?
Yeah, so resumes are so interesting, and there's so many different, experts on resumes, and it's tough because you never know who's going to see it. So I think it depends. If you have a lot of skill set for this specific role that was maybe prior to that gap, have a little note at the top, like a one sentence, just addressing that gap right away, and then immediately dive into a thorough description of that high-end experience you have for that role. If there's kind of, partial gaps here and there, I'd say anything under 6 months, you don't really need to address. I think if you're getting that 6 month to a year plus, just have a quick note after all your work experience, say, additional experience or, professional time, a kind of a subsection under your experience where you can address kind of what was going on with each of those. A quick one sentence scenario works. I always recommend that if people are going to be taking time away from their, professional life and moving out of a job, if you have the availability and the time, do, trainings and, some free or very inexpensive education that you can, again, your personal situation, so that you can show that you were doing continuous education or training during those gaps. Because even though you might have a gap in employment, employers are going to like to see that someone is still being engaged and being active either in that field or their professional career path while they, needed to step away for a while. I think that's always a positive thing that shows, commitment and engagement from a potential employee.
Excellent. Thank you. And I did just submit via the chat. If someone wants a resume review, you can send your resume to our career office, and I sent the link. Tyler, another question, and this is a really good one. Someone says, I've noticed companies are using new technologies of having candidates to submit video recorded responses to set questions from the company. And issues with that are there's no HR or interviewers to focus on or adapt the feedback based on their social cues. Any advice on this new format in advance for someone using Zoom and et cetera?
100%. So you're going to see, I'll try not to nerd out too hard here because yes, pre-recorded video interviews are in place now, and they're going to be far more relevant across the board moving forward. I personally love to use them. I think there's a lot of positivity to them. So similar to a video interview, right? Get ready, be set up, right? Professional attire, at least kind of business casual, quiet, secluded place that has good lighting, I think is really positive. If you can use a laptop or an iPad that's going to give you that, again, that eye contact with the camera, I think that's really good. If you have to use a mobile phone, set it up on something. Don't do the selfie mode. It's very distracting. If you have to, if you're in a pinch, you're on break, you're from your car, again, try to get it stationary, but if you have to, stay consistent with it. We don't want people all over the place doing interviews. It's not an Instagram live video. So I think that's really good. And again, the audio quality there is really important too. If you can route headphones in, it's going to have cleaner and clearer audio for you. And then be prepared, right? Again, find a time where it can be quiet, where you can be focused, and be prepared, right? Dress professionally, know the role, get yourself set up, maybe do a little Zen moment, for a few minutes beforehand. But I think Marcia talked about it earlier, talk with a smile, be excited, be engaged. But at the same time, they can be tricky. So if you fail on a question or your dog's barking in the background, for example, that's okay. Stay focused. They're not going to, decline you from the job because your dog barked in the background, right? Or someone knocks on your front door. Those aren't going to be instant declines. So don't wear that too hard on yourself. Stay focused, power through the question, and then end with a good conclusion. And again, transparency and accountability. If you get hit with a question that you are not qualified or don't have that experience, you can say, I don't directly have that experience, but based on my other previous experience, X, Y, and Z, or education, how I would approach this is, and then be proactive, right? Forward thinking mindset. Even though you don't have the skill set, what skill sets do you have or experience do you have to help you take on that new task or that new challenge? People love to see when someone's willing to engage and take on a challenge, and be, kind of concise, right? Think of this as like a short public speech. Use the STAR method, right? Introduction, key points, conclusion. Wrap it up. A lot of the video interview options will give you multiple attempts to record. Usually I would give candidates 2 because it is a little bit unnerving and it is a new situation for most. So it's okay. If you made a mistake on the first one, regroup, Zen moment, be ready, and know how to improve on the next one. I think those are good tips, and don't be too nervous about it. Think of it as you're taking a video on your phone, you're recording something, what you want to say, and you're ready, to make the best of it. And worst case scenario, you bomb one question. No one's perfect. Regroup, focus up for the next one. If people have 10 questions asked, one's awful, one's not that bad, but it's and then 8 are really good. They're probably going to focus on the 8, Oh, and also, please don't swear. I've had a few of those. Please don't swear. It's still a job interview.
Excellent. Thank you. And Tyler, last question, and then we're going to go to questions for both of you. Last question for you is, how does networking help with interviewing, and what would you recommend? And we'll do just a few seconds for that one, then move on to the other questions.
Absolutely. So I'll go quick. So number one, if you're not on LinkedIn, please get on LinkedIn. It's still the number one professional website for networking, career development, and it's free. It's basically a way for you to get your information and be looked at as a job seeker, passively or actively. There's a lot of good tools to help with that. I think it's a great, tool to be able to look into your interviewers on the front end. Look into people One of the notes I actually took is, if you know someone at that company or in a similar role or has worked at that company, reach out to them if you have a close enough connection. Let them know that you're interviewing. See if they got a few minutes to hop on a call on their way home or over the weekend, just to give you their insight on it. Because again, that's going to tie back in then to, hey, I actually reached out to one of my colleagues who works for you guys and had a great conversation, learned more about the company. I'm even more excited now. There's that go-getter mentality. So definitely look to utilize networking tools, to position yourself in a positive light. Because again, you never know who's going to be that next connection that helps you land where you need to. Definitely use those tools.
Excellent. Yeah, I can't speak more highly of networking. We're going to move to the next portion of the webcast, which is questions for both Marcia and Tyler. And the format will be Marcia will answer first and Tyler. The first question for that, and like I said, Marcia will answer first and Tyler. As a recruiter, this is a big one. How are you viewing the 1 to 2 year gap that has occurred during the pandemic?
I think a lot of employers are pretty open and understanding due to some of the challenges that have been going on with the pandemic. I was impacted as well, and was furloughed and laid off. And it's all about what you do in the time that you are away from work, right? So I think Tyler mentioned a little bit is, maybe you weren't working, but maybe you were improving your technical skills. Maybe you have signed up online to take a course, or maybe you expanded your knowledge, or you did some additional volunteer work that you maybe hadn't had a chance to do in the past. Highlight those things. I think they're all relevant. And I think I would say, I hope, I can't commit that everyone, but I would hope that a lot of employers are a little softer on that stance of what 2020 was like for everybody. You know, some had a little rougher years than others.
I think she nailed it. You know, what are you doing with your time and doing to improve yourself? I think that is something that every employer wants to hear positive answers to. You know, you're hit with adversity. What did you do to get back up? How did you get back up? What were the tactics you took to position yourself to be in a better place afterwards? Again, with the digital world, there's so many free trainings and educational opportunities, webinars, seminars online. I mean, the massive networking events throughout the country have all went to remote. I've probably been on 30 different large scale engagements. So being active in that, I love the volunteering aspect. You know, again, we're in such a digital world, but that human connection is still there. I think no one's ever going to be upset at someone trying to bring positivity and helping others into the world. So those are definitely good things to do. And then have a pretty clear, concise explanation to what happened, right? Almost STAR method with this. I was at a company, we were, you know, 100% on site. It wasn't an essential business. You know, they had to shut down. There were mass layoffs as part of that. My goal then was to regroup and make sure, you know, X, Y, Z. So the actions I took were this. The results are that I'm currently in the interview process to get back into the industry, and, you know, with the goal of landing an awesome opportunity with your company after this interview. So be able to be, you know, direct, but also clear on kind of what happened and what you did about it and where you're looking to go.
Absolutely. And from talking with alumni, a lot of people experienced those kind of transitions, as Marcia mentioned. So really valuable advice on that. Another question, this came through both the registration form as also through the live Q&A. What are good questions to ask the employer during the interview? And then during from the Q&A, they said, how do you approach preparing questions to ask the interviewers? I have a few role-specific questions I have as a result of knowing about the position. But in addition to that, are there any good rules of thumb for those kind of questions? And Marcia and then Tyler.
You know, I think it's important to have some specific questions to have versus the general ones, because it goes back to the fact that you've actually done some research, you've looked for some information that maybe you can learn more about. It shows that you have interest in the organization. If you don't know too much about the organization, you're trying to learn. So I do think that a mix of some general with specific pointed questions are great. You know, some of the ones that it depends on the roles, right, that you're applying for, but you know, especially if it's more of a director level or higher management level, knowing what the strategy of the company is a great question, right? So that way you kind of already know maybe what you're going to be stepping into and what your role would play in that venue or in that aspect. You know, I would ask, you know, another question is, how did the company adjust to the pandemic, right? I think that speaks volumes as to, I know when I was doing my job search, I asked that question. And when I heard, you know, some of the companies said, well, we had to, you know, lay off X amount of people and, you know, we had to do this and we struggled with going virtually. I was like, I'm not sure if that's a good fit for me. Versus someone else who was like, you know what, we cared so much about our associates, we did X, Y, Z. And, you know, we adjusted this, we did that, we sent everybody home, didn't even question whether or not they were going to be working, but wanted to make sure that they were safe first, right? And to me, again, is that aligned with my personal set of core values? Then yes. So that's something that, again, I could pick up during the interview, because they're not interviewing just you, right? You're also interviewing them. And as you go in your career, and I learned this later on in my career, is you want to find a company that is aligned to who you are as well. Otherwise, sometimes it's going to be a little bit more challenging. And you might not feel that you can be your true authentic self when you're there at that organization.
Yeah, I think those are some fantastic points. So we'll start kind of like general and then get to specific. So I think number one is know your audience, right? So as someone who is the front line, and, you know, I spent 4.5 years being the front line at specific companies, I'd have some candidates that would come with really highly technical questions for me about the role in the team. I generally could never answer those for them to the level they're looking for. So look at who you're interviewing with, right? Is it an HR or talent acquisition representative? Is it the direct hiring manager? Is it someone tangentially tied in a different org or group on the team? So kind of know your audience and what questions you're going to gear towards those folks. I think if you're really talking to someone in HR or talent acquisition, it's okay to have a few semi-general ones there, but be specific towards the company. But you can ask if they'll know some of the more role-specific ones you want to ask. A lot of the time they'll say probably save that for the next round. With the hiring managers, I think it's really important to ask what success looks like in this role, because you want to hear from your potential future boss how they're going to view your success and abilities in that role. And then how does this role impact the team and the overall company? You want to know what you're going to be doing for the company and how you're going to be helping the company achieve goals. And then I think a trap situation, and I am so guilty of this, I cost myself a massive promotion early in my career, is if you've had a really positive interview or even a primarily positive interview, avoid any questions at the end that are potentially going to have a negative element to them. Asking for feedback of where you fell short or asking for feedback of where you're not as qualified. They've probably told you that, or they might not, but bringing that mindset up at the end of an interview to where you're making the hiring team essentially go to a negative place, that's going to be a pretty strong lasting impression of the interview process. So if you've done a fantastic job, there's very positive vibes throughout the whole, interview, feeling good, they seem excited, don't take them to negative town, because unfortunately that's probably going to be one of those situations. That's what they're left with, and that'll weigh way heavier than the 95% of the interview that went amazing. So I know as humans, we crave, feedback and knowledge and want to know how to improve. But again, know your audience and know the time and place, because leaving interviewers in either a potentially awkward or kind of negative feeling space at the end really will hurt your candidacy. And then it makes them question kind of that overall awkward and negative aspect of it, if that's going to tie into future conversations with other team members or external stakeholders as well.
Such a valid point. Absolutely love that. The last question I have for both of you is kind of tied to what you were both sharing about that impression, is how do you recommend someone makes a good first impression during an interview?
I think for me, first impressions do weigh a lot in terms of the interview process, right? Because it's your one chance to shine and to really advocate for yourself. And so I would say first impressions for me are really about your attitude. You may not have the right, maybe it's not the best answer, but how did you handle that adjustment that you had to make, right? Did you get flustered? Did you get frustrated? If you didn't have a good response or just came up with a blank, how did you solve that for yourself, right? What was your reaction? I look at some of those things that maybe you might not think as the interviewee that are that important, but how you react to flustered situations is a good indicator of how you might react in change management, or how you might react when I have to surprise you with an additional assignment at the end of the day, or saying, hey, I need this task added to you, and are you going to get flustered? Are you going to be able to handle that change and that transition pretty seamlessly, right? So I think those are some of the things that I look for. I look for somebody who has the ability to showcase their skills and their experiences, with the ability to also be humble, right, about those experiences that they've gained and how they've come across gaining them. What have they done that really makes them unique and stand out, and how can they bring that aspect to the organization? And so those are some of the things I personally look for. I'm not looking for like the perfect interviewer. I'm not looking for the 4.0 candidate. I'm not looking for the person who has, master's, PhD, whatever it might be. I'm looking for, who are you as a person? And how is that person going to work here in our organization? And again, each organization is going to be different. And so what I might be looking for from a partner hero side of things is going to be very different than maybe what my previous employers were looking for. And so as a recruiter, I also need to adjust that side of things. But know the partner, know the company that you're looking to work for, get to know them a little bit. And I think that helps with providing what some of those first impressions might be.
Step one, be prepared, right? We talked about it already. Do your research, come in, ready, on time, professional. Preparation, I think, is key to start it off right, and then engagement. Doesn't mean you have to be the rah-rah cheerleader, team captain type, right? Not everybody's that person. Not every role is going to call for that, but there's still a way to be engaged and show interest into the role, and that you're committed to, that time everyone's spending together for potentially aligning this opportunity together. I think when someone's engaged, they're curious, there's some excitement to what you're discussing. I think that's always a great way. I think it's kind of human nature. People want people that want to be where they're at or doing what they're doing for that reason, right? Someone doesn't seem like they want to be there, or it seems distracted, or just really isn't that enthused. That's going to stick out really quickly. On the flip side, keeping that level of engagement, keeping that level of positivity is going to be beneficial throughout. And then I'm circling back to the accountability piece, right? Chances are you're going to fall short. Sometimes chances are you're not going to have the perfect answer to every question. Chances are you might stumble a little bit. Regroup, be accountable where your shortcomings are, have a plan around what you can do around that. And I think with the accountability piece, it's so crazy and yet so simple, is follow up. 24 hours later, within 24 hours later, send them a thank you email. If you're going through a third-party agency or through a recruiter, you can just email to them, say, hey, would you please pass this along to the hiring team? I just wanted to express my thanks for their time and efforts during the interview process. Or you can also ask for their contact info. Likely you're not going to get it, just to control the communication, but follow up. I've actually landed 2 jobs, and the differentiating factor for me and the other finalist candidate was my follow-up and constant communication within professional timeframes that I did and another candidate didn't, and that helped tip the scale. So you'd be shocked how few candidates follow up thanking people for their time and effort after interviews. It will never hurt you to shoot a short 2 to 3 sentence thank you for your time and effort email within around 24 hours after the interview. It's so simple and yet so commonly not used, and that can leave such a positive impact on the hiring team.
So much good content here. Our very last question of the webcast is to the presenters, which is, what are the key summary takeaways? Obviously, interviewing is a really big topic. We could probably spend all day and have a full whole afternoon session on this. From your perspective, what are those key things you'd want people to remember?
I think for me, the key thing is, number one, be prepared. I know Tyler talked about LinkedIn profiles. Make sure your LinkedIn profile and your resume match. I would say that's one piece. Be mindful of what you put on your resume, as questions can come up during the interview process about that. So it's okay to elaborate and add to your resume, but be truthful about what's on there, because you don't want that to come up during an interview if somebody were to ask you about your experience and it kind of catches you off guard. So make sure things are aligned, make sure you're prepared, and make sure that, one, you're comfortable where you are for the virtual setting, and that you are on time, both in person and virtually, for an interview, and be as communicative as you can with the recruiter. I will caveat that communication side of things is, as a reminder, recruiters are also looking at multiple candidates at the same time. So if they are not able to respond, in 4 hours, it's because they have something else that they might be focused on. So make sure you're giving the liberty of at least 24 to 48 hours in terms of expecting a response time.
So I always love the motto of, when you don't have a job, your job is to get a job. So treat getting a job like it's your job, right? Job a lot there, I know. But I think that's really the key. I saw a good quote yesterday, actually talking with some friends, is that no one ever excused their way to success. I mean, it's on you to have that accountability and go after what you want. I mean, I've loved what Marcia has brought to the table here. And if you're facing a lot of interviews coming up, take the recording of this, rewatch it, you know, in your free time, and take some notes where you know that you need to, you know, kind of step your game up and be prepared. Being prepared and ready for interviews, being engaged, and being able, again, to be accountable throughout those will always benefit you. And always look at ways of, what am I doing to set myself up for success? And, you know, have those honest questions with yourself, you know, because if you know you got to prepare for an interview, should you really watch that next episode on Netflix, or should you probably take that 30 minutes to clean up your LinkedIn a little bit and do a little more research on the company? I think it's really easy to, you know, put off something because we're not great at it. You know, people are usually afraid of what they're not strong at. But by challenging that and taking those on, you're going to make yourself a better professional in person moving forward. And that's going to help you be more confident and be more prepared and engaged for those interviews. And it's going to lead to more success. So, you know, don't think of this as it has to be an all or nothing situation that you have to do every single thing we talked about today. You know, baby steps, right? Find a couple things you can work on as you progress, you know, at getting better at interviews. And then as you feel you're strong with those, circle back and work on a couple more. And then sooner or later, you're going to find out that you're actually leading interview panels at your next job, and you're the one people are coming to for interview advice. So, you know, be prepared, be engaged, be accountable, and, you know, you got this. So that's the thing. You got this.
Thank you both so much. That was really insightful and excellent. Love that you got this motivation at the end. We're here to help you. Send us your resume. Let us know if you need help prepping for an interview, etc. Thank you to Marcia and Tyler for being here to share. They are fantastic, wonderful alumni career ambassadors who volunteer their time to help the OSU community. And we're so grateful that you're both here. Thank you for everyone who attended this as well. And good job for developing yourself professionally and continuing to learn. I will be sending out a summary of some of the learning points that we covered today, as well as a recording for this webcast. I'm also going to be sending you a link to our OSU Connection site, which is a new online platform that is a social online professional networking site where you can meet people like Tyler and Marcia on there. You can ask advice, you can join, you can ask for information reviews, and join the alumni community in networking and connect with people. As we've heard, that's a big thing for interviewing and preparing yourself. Otherwise, thank you so much for joining. We're excited that you're here, and I'll see you at the next one.